So what the idea really was to map people's conceptions of what well-being is. And when I say people, I mean lay people, so non-experts. So it was non-experts or lay conceptions of well-being, and really, really simply what it is, how they describe it and define it, what makes it better and worse. And then from that qualitative survey, which was just it was literally just a couple of open-ended questions, I've then kind of crafted that through a reflexive thematic analysis process into what has become a model of wellbeing. Actually, I didn't intend to do that, but it was a way of communicating what I found.
All right, my name is Dr. Matthew Aiello. Welcome to Researching Happy. This is the podcast all about the stories behind the studies of the happiness and wellbeing research world. So this is episode 19. Thank you for all of the support for the show, for the feedback, for ideas. As I've said every episode, please keep it coming. This is really, I want to learn, I want to improve as we go along. And this next guest is a person who I really consider a friend, even though we kind of don't know each other that well. Someone who's doing extremely genuine work in the wellbeing world. And as you've heard in the past episodes, the research world can sometimes be a game of strategy, of chasing sort of arbitrary university KPIs, and which that, it sometimes comes as a distraction away from doing good work and doing sort of important work. And so this next guest, soon to be Dr. Annalise Roache, is someone who kind of transcends all of those distractions and really just focuses on the work itself, to great effect, as you'll see. Annalise is a positive psychology practitioner. She's a coach and a wellbeing researcher. She is the co-president of the New Zealand Association of Positive Psychology and a PhD candidate at the Auckland University of Technology. So if you follow the Researching Happy page on LinkedIn, you'll know that I share one or two clips of the episode before it goes live. And Annalise's clip has received more traction, I think, than almost any other clip, which really shows to me that her work is right on the money in terms of satisfying a real research need, and demonstrates the respect that Annalise herself has built in the research community. We walk through through Annalise's PhD work, focused on lay perspectives of well-being. So put simply, Annalise asked over 1,000 New Zealanders what well-being means to them. So a few show notes. We had some technical glitches, I think, at the start of the episode. And throughout, I had like a splitting headache. So if you're new to the show, this is not my... probably my normal self. Hopefully you can't really tell, and it's absolutely no reflection on Annalise. It's just one of those days. But what I've done at the end of the episode, I've attached Annalise's recorded lecture from the IPPA World Congress, obviously with her permission, so that you can see all of the scientific detail. I think it's about a 20-minute presentation. So you can see that at the end of the episode. And in the show notes, you'll see, or in the description, you'll see that there's a link that Annalise has built where you can provide feedback on the model that Annalise discusses and that she's produced throughout her PhD, which again just shows, she's thinking outside the box. And I think for me, feedback is really important, I think, to Annalise as well. And I'm not sure how she's using it, but I'm sure it will all be very valuably received. You can support the podcast on locals.com, which is sort of like a alternative to Patreon. Its support starts at $5 a month, and thanks to those who have already supported the show, really means a lot. And you can stay in touch with the show on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. And if you subscribing and rating the show really basically makes a big difference to our algorithm gods out there. So with that, the last thing, that's what I put at the end of every little intro, I guess, is share this episode just with one other person. That's all I really ask. Just want this episode to go out, like all episodes, to go to the right people who are interested in this stuff. And, as we've seen already a little bit so far online, there's a lot of interest in this episode. So make sure it goes out there. Get credit where credit's due for Annalise's work. I think she deserves all the exposure. And with that, enjoy the episode. Thank you. Okay. We're here with Annalise Roache. So a little bit of intro to Annalise. So it's this weird thing. I feel it. I don't know whether other people feel it, but when we met by email, we were talking about, we're kind of doing PhDs on similar topics. I think the PhDs actually ended up going in separate directions, which would be good to know about. But you just feel this like kinship or something when there's someone else in another country doing something very similar to you, and you just have this sort of reciprocal, helpful background. So I can hear a bit of my voice in the background there. Hopefully that's not coming through, but I can probably deal with that anyway. So welcome, Annalise.
Thank you. Lovely to be here finally. I'm sorry it's taken so long.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been almost the hardest guest to catch, to be honest with you, Annalise. You've been extremely busy.
And you've had Corey Keys and Lindsay Oates. I feel maybe they're at the different end of their career, right? Like they've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably slightly less balancing.
Yeah, exactly. Mm. Yeah.
So, why don't you quickly introduce yourself?
So Annalise Roache. I'm a coach, positive psychology practitioner by day, and I say now by night, a PhD student, which seems to be leading to a lot of late nights. So I work with individuals, small groups, and organisations, and helping them to kind of achieve the things they want to achieve in life. Really, it's that simple. And I use positive psychology as much as I can in those settings, and that's how I came to positive psychology, was through my coaching. I was looking for a kind of a backbone, an evidence base to my coaching practice. I learned how to become a coach, and then I thought, I don't know how people work, better go and figure that out. So, so that's how I got to positive psychology. So I love trying to bring those two together as much as possible.
Great. And so what was it? Like, what years were you finding out about positive psychology, just so I'm sort of clear?
Yeah, so I think I started an undergraduate degree. So I had a very mixed entry to academia in my 20s. Basically, I went to university and found the pub and politics. That's how my recollection of my early 20s. Didn't find anything to do with education or knowledge. And so I dropped out of uni, and so I didn't really have kind of a great relationship with academia. And then it was about 2004-05, I sort of decided to retrain from what I was doing and become a coach. And as I said, did all the coach training, loved it, and then just was looking for something. I knew I needed something else to understand how to use my coaching and to work with people. And I remember vividly, I walked out of the supermarket and I came around the corner to a newsagent, and in the window was this giant cover of a magazine, and it's called The Listener here in New Zealand, and it's I don't know what you'd call it. It's kind of comes out weekly, quite good quality stories, usually like one or two lead articles, and on the cover of it is positive psychology. And I thought, what's that? Like, it was like an instantaneous, spark. Like, what is this positive psychology thing? I need this in my life. So I went in and bought the magazine, and then hunted high and low to try and find anything I could on positive psychology. So that was 2008, maybe. So it was quite early, really.
Wow. All right, cool.
Yeah. And then I found the New Zealand Association of Positive Psychology, funnily enough. And our friend Aaron Jardine was the president then. And so he was running, he used to write these amazing newsletters, which was kind of like a summary of things that were going on and books that he'd read and people he was interviewing. And that gave me an introduction to positive psychology. And then I found an undergraduate degree in Australia through the Australian College of Applied Psychology that actually had coaching and positive psychology. So I thought I'll go back to uni, and I was in my mid-30s. and I'll try and squeeze it in around my practice. And then, I just fell in love. I literally fell in love with the field. I fell in love with learning, challenging myself. And so here I am, how many years later that is. I lost track, 14.
Yeah.
Doing
Okay,
my PhD.
cool. All right, nice. And so you mentioned the New Zealand, what's it called? Sorry, the New Zealand Association for Positive Psychology.
NZAP, NZAPP.
Yeah. So when you first learned about it, our friend who'll be on the show soon, Aaron Jardin, was the president, but you are now the president.
Interestingly enough. So so I'm now co-president. So we've got I share the presidency role with Dr. Annick Jansen. Yeah, so it's quite a nice bookend, I guess, to have kind of been introduced to positive psychology through the association. I've always been somebody that volunteered and kind of gave my time. I worked spent 3 or 4 years on the International Coach Federation local chapter as well. So it's just always something I've been interested in, is kind of creating those spaces for like-minded people to connect and to be upskilled. I think those are the kind of the key things I think associations like that do. And so came on board as the co-president last year, and then was the vice president for a few years before that. So it's interesting.
And what kind of things does the association do?
So predominantly right now we've only recently moved to a paid membership. It was for a decade or more. It was effectively a big newsletter and a website where people could come and kind of find information. And then we decided about 2 years ago to move to a paid membership and try and become a bit more proactive, I guess, in what we were doing as an association. And at the heart of it is the word association. It's a place to associate. So, our goals are to bring people together who are interested in positive psychology so that they can learn more about it or share about it, share what they're doing, keep up to date, have people like yourself on who come and share, research findings that are not always easy for the everyday person, like the coach and the practitioner to access. So it's trying to upskill people and connect them. And we do that through running regular events. We run networking events. We had one last night, which are more kind of informal, and then we have these learning sessions where people like yourself who come on and bring us up to speed on some recent findings.
Yeah, cool. I guess I will ask because I actually don't think there's an Australian association of PosPsych. Maybe there was one, or maybe there is one. I just don't know about it.
No,
but,
I don't believe there is.
Do you know, is there one?
No, there isn't. And we actually have quite a few.
Okay, so yeah.
So come on down.
Oh, really?
Come on over. If
you have a few because they... Do you mean you have a lot of Australians because they're living in New Zealand, or because they join the association from here?
No, they join the association from Australia. With the New Zealand Association of Positive Psychology, we've got somebody in Spain, somebody in Singapore. Like I said, quite a few Australians that join in. So, we welcome all. You don't have to be resident in New Zealand to participate. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so do you have everyone around the world looks at New Zealand and the wellbeing budget and these sorts of things. Do you have much sort of advocacy work, or do you connect with government in any way?
Not yet, but it's definitely, kind of the third pillar of what we're looking to work towards having, to being a sustainable organisation. That means we can start doing that outward work and to advocate. So some of our members definitely will be in those roles, but not us as an association as such yet. But it's definitely a goal.
Okay, and cool. So advocacy is the third pillar. What are the first two, sorry?
So connecting like-minded people and then upskilling them and contributing to positive psychology. So those two, receiving from and giving to the field. Yep.
Awesome. Cool. And I mean, I should say thank you for the invitations to come and present as well that you offered for myself and my colleague Yup.
Yep. Yeah, and we're so grateful for people like yourself. So they're so well received. Everybody loves these sessions, and I think they're based on what IPPA does with the I think they call it the Leaders series, is it? That's kind of where the idea came from. Was let's see if we can kind of add more to that, add more opportunity for people to hear directly from the researcher. And I know I've heard you talk about it yourself. There's something quite special about hearing first person from the person who's doing the work. You get to hear the kind of nuance. You get to hear actually what they were intending to try and communicate or develop or research.
Yeah, no, for sure. Agreed. And I think even for the audience member, like, you go to IPPA, as we were just talking sort of offline, talking about the IPPA conference, and it's nice to be there, but it's, even if you're the presenter, I think you can find yourself for whatever reason in a room with 3 people, because there's like multiple streams and there are clashes and whatever. So I think even as a presenter, it's nice to go, like, our experience was to come along to your sessions, and there was like 80 people in there or something, and to have interaction and know that this is an audience of people who are there specifically because they want to learn this thing that you've got to say, like, that's pretty nice as well.
Yeah. Oh, great. Good. I'm glad it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I may have like totally inflated those numbers. I'm pretty sure it was like 80. Could have been like 25, but
I can't recall.
Okay. It was 80 in my mind.
We do often
That's
get
okay. It doesn't matter.
We do often get 70-ish, so you're probably pretty close.
Cool. All right. Awesome. So, would you call it would you ever rename it to be the Australian and New Zealand Association?
Well, I would never say never when it comes to these things, particularly when you're trying to be, sustainable, and have reach. So never say never. I guess we could look. We could definitely look at. We'd have to be a little bit careful. You guys are a lot bigger than us. So when I say you guys, I'm actually Australian. So yeah. So
are you really?
Yeah. Australia. I've only recently become a New Zealand citizen. I've been here 30 years, but yeah, I actually hold dual citizenship.
Oh, there you go. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. I'm just thinking, you're an Australian. You've got a bunch of Australian members. I'd like to see an Australian association, but I also don't want to have to start one. So I can imagine you've kind of already done half the job.
Maybe
anyway,
we need to start. We'll start that conversation offline, John.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Maybe twist a few people's arms that I can imagine that you'd have contacts with. So what I wanted to really talk to you today about, Annalise, was your PhD, because we first met each other however many years ago it was. We were talking about the dual continuum model, and I think, if I've understood correctly, maybe that was an initial focus of your PhD, but fair to say it's changed a fair bit. Yeah. At least that's how I've, you kind of like lose track of people over time. But recently when we caught up again, I was just absolutely blown away by how much work you've done. And so I just want to ask you a million questions about your work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and you're right. It has, when it started, I started as a practitioner, and I'd done a randomized controlled trial for my master's thesis. Despite my wonderful supervisor's declaration to try and stop me doing that, I insisted that it was the gold standard and I must do that in order to contribute to the field, and it just about killed me. And so I had learnt from the enormity of doing a randomized controlled trial in under a year, and I went on to do my PhD thinking I want to keep doing that. I'm a practitioner. I want to do something practical and develop a program for my findings. And so I went off. The whole first year was under the impression that I was going to develop an intervention to contribute to the positive psychology field. Mm-hmm. It took a year for me, and one of my supervisors in particular, Lindsay Oates, to kind of convince me to go a bit higher, a bit more conceptual, get above that kind of the intervention world, and think more conceptually. Yeah. Yeah.
So what any wisdom that comes from Lindsay Oates, I highly value. What was it that made him say that? Was it about who you are or who you were as a student, or was it just the topic that you're interested? What was it that made him say go more conceptual?
Yeah, I think it's probably all of the above. I think it's some of the work, I guess, that's coming out of the waves, which I've been really, the waves of positive psychology have been really influenced by I like to call it the weird and the waves. Those two things have really influenced my own thinking around the contribution I want to make to positive psychology, and around the way, the waves, the third wave of positive psychology, looking about that methodological broadening to move into a more qualitative analysis or exploration. And so that was one of the things, was that I, as I said, I did the randomized control trial, and while it was really interesting, it was fascinating, I kind of got to the end of it and I was like, and what does that tell me? It doesn't tell me anything. It just gives me a bunch of numbers, doesn't tell me how it can actually influence those people's lives or what change we could make. I can't even tell you really why the changes happened, because I can't talk to those people. So there was that. So there was that kind of call of like, I wanted to do a different type of research, and I'd always had this burning question right from the word go: what is well-being? What is happiness or well-being? I was kind of interchangeable around those core concept ideas, and so that's where we got to it. Lindsay just said to me, "What do you really want to research? What do you really want to know about?" And that's what I wanted to know about it. What do people think well-being is? Hence the change. And now I've done a giant study.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And so, yeah, like seriously giant. And that's why it was like, sometimes you hear of someone work and you think, oh, that's a cool idea. Like, let's see what happens. But then, yeah, I think so within the gap, I don't know, I could have gone back to the emails and figured out the gap, but it must have been a few years. It's like the next time I saw you, it was like, oh yeah, I've got like 200,000 words of survey data about people's lay conceptions of well-being. Yeah. So it completely blew me away. So before I jump the gun and tell people what it is, why don't you describe your work to date?
Yeah, so I ended up doing a mixed methods exploratory descriptive study, to use the big words. And so what the idea really was to map people's conceptions of what well-being is. And when I say people, I mean lay people, so non-experts. And that was really determined. It was kind of self-determined whether or not somebody considered themselves to be an expert or not. And the way I phrased it was, do you have a model or a concept of well-being that you work to or live to? And if you do, then you probably have some sort of expertise in well-being. Most people don't really walk around with a model of well-being, like PERMA, for example, or whatever might come to mind for you. So it was non-experts or lay conceptions of well-being, and really, really simply what it is, how they describe it and define it, what makes it better and worse. And then from that qualitative survey, which was just it was literally just a couple of open-ended questions. I've then kind of crafted that through a reflexive thematic analysis process into what has become a model of well-being. Actually, I didn't intend to do that, but it was a way of communicating what I found.
Cool.
Yeah. So sometimes when you're so close to it, it's kind of hard. So I ended up doing this online survey because
I think so.
Yeah. Sorry, go.
No, that's okay. So as I understand, you reached about 1,000 people from that survey. Is that correct?
Yes, 1,064 to be precise.
Yep. There you go. Okay. How 1064? Why is that number in my head for some reason?
Meaning of life.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't know. I think it's the year that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. How did you find so many people to do a survey? Like, that's not easy to do.
Yeah. So
how did you send it out to the people?
So I did a kind of a convenience sample. So I did it through Facebook. I did it through contacts I had directly and asked them to pass on the invitation. It was an anonymous online survey. So I didn't have any follow up with those people, which I think in part maybe kind of helped as well. Like, I don't know if I can say that, but I mean, it was prolific, Matt. Like, people were very, very happy to talk about it, and they were very happy to talk about it in quite large scale ways. Like, I was surprised. I expect the ethics people were like, you're never going to get enough people to do this. And I was like, I kind of feel confident I will. I'm going to push on. And, I was getting 40 to 50 responses a day. So they were just piling in. I think there was a couple of different things. I think. Oh yeah, go on.
Sorry.
We're crossing over.
No, please.
That lag is happening. So I think there's a couple of different things at play. I think it was anonymous. It was online. They could do it at their own pace, own time, own place. Which was kind of important to me, that they, didn't have to come into a lab to do it. They didn't have to talk to a researcher. It was really unprompted. I was really, really committed to not placing a framework on these people and just letting them actually have the opportunity to share whatever it was that came to mind for them from the prompts were so simplified down. It took me about 7 months just to write 9 questions. Like, it was, and working and refining and talking to different specialists about how to ask these questions in a way that would get out of the way of the people effectively. And I think that actually worked, because they really did. Some people obviously shared less, but I think the top end, like, people wrote 2,000-3,000 words to 9 questions.
Seriously?
Yeah, they were like little essays, some of them, and some of them were just lists of responses depending on how the person was thinking about it. And so I did this. So I put it online. I've got a Facebook page I've been building over years through my own practice called the Happiness Hub. So I posted it on there, and then I boosted it, and so they put it on Instagram, and then it went crazy. It went all over the country. So it's only New Zealand adults, I should say. So resident New Zealand, it's adults and non-experts. Those were the criteria for entering. And I put $100, a chance to win one of $500 vouchers. So there you go. That's how the sum total.
Yeah, that's a huge response. Like, I'm thinking we had a large response for one of our surveys similar, where that was about the impact of the border closure on well-being.
Yeah.
And again, we were sort of blown away with the response, but I guess we sort of rationalized it as it was something that was so close to people's hearts.
Yeah.
So I guess just talking like generally about well-being, I'm surprised that it really got such a reaction, but maybe it is as close to people's hearts, say, as some of these other sort of more political things.
Yeah, and I think it is, isn't it? Like, I think, I don't think it's just because we're interested in it or we're in the field of positive psychology and wellbeing science. I think people are interested in wellbeing. I think it's a pertinent topic, and it, there's been some kind of discussions around whether it's being a bit overused, the word, and whether it's been misused. That certainly came through in my research. I called it the misappropriation or the misuse of magic.
Really?
The misuse of well-being, kind of the commodification and selling of well-being. I think that is a problem, but obviously it's not tarnishing the concept enough that people weren't attracted to talk about it, and they had really clear ideas about what well-being was. And they're really, like, I cannot strongly say enough how clever they were. The responses were so rich and clever and diverse and interesting and profound, and more than any researcher I've ever picked up and read. Hands down. So.
Yeah, I bet. Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's I hope that this is going to be one of the more celebrated aspects of your work, because I think it definitely deserves it. But that idea of 7 months to generate 9 questions, like, no one spends that much time on this thing.
Yes.
So that's really, really exciting, Annalise. And so what was like the headline? I'm just interested in I'm interested in the sort of the marketing of well-being. Like, when we sort of say, like, come and do this thing to build your well-being, that really makes some people jump and some people just absolutely turn away.
Yeah.
But it's not the content, it's just it's what they have in their mind about well-being. So what was your like headline of your recruitment?
Wellbeing's a hot topic. We want to hear what you think about it. Something like that. Something like it was something.
Oh, okay.
Can't quite remember, but it was wellbeing's a hot topic. That was the big words in the recruitment ad. So
cool.
Yeah, literally that's it. We want to hear what you think about it. Yeah, it was really simple. So and the commodification.
Okay, and can you share?
Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah. Sorry, we're breaking up a little bit, but just with the commodification, just keep going.
Yeah, well, it's kind of going back to what you were saying about that on the surface. So like some of the responses around that, I think actually it's an article in its own right. They were just brilliant. Like some people were. So the first question is, when you hear the word well-being, what comes to mind for you? What thoughts, ideas, images, memories, anything that you want to write about? That's literally like a summary of kind of the first question. So it was a describe well-being to me. And, sometimes they would say things like Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop and, these like, white women eating salads in yoga pants. That's one of the direct quotes. Like, that's what when they hear the word well-being, that's what came to mind for them. Like that was fantastic. I loved it. I want to put the cover of my PhD as all these quotes. But then they also
that's a nice idea.
But what is well-being to me? And then they went on to the the kind of more personalized and profound personal idea of what well-being was. But their initial reaction was this appropriated version of well-being. But they moved past that. It's not what they really were.
Yeah. Okay. And so you think people? Yeah. So people could tell the difference between how it's marketed at them versus what they truly believe it to be.
Yes, 100%. And they definitely clearly talked about kind of that externalization of that sales process was not something they were being, they weren't being taken in by it. They knew that it was being sold to them, but that isn't necessarily how they viewed their own well-being. Interesting.
Yeah,
not
interesting.
At all
I guess in my mind, I kind of hold the difference. Yeah, I kind of hold the difference between like wellness being some of that stuff, like the yoga pants and the candles and spa days and stuff like that, versus well-being. But obviously, that's just in my mind, right? It's not really it's not agreed upon by anyone else.
Yeah, and I think I think that's like kind of those of us that are researching this stuff. We have those different words, don't we? We know, flourishing, well-being, happiness. Languishing, we kind of maybe can know the nuances of those words and would separate out wellness and well-being, but the average person on the street kind of they're morphing together a bit more.
All right, so how long ago did you collect that data?
2019, 2020. So
oh really?
Yeah. So just as COVID was striking, it finished before COVID.
Yeah.
And
oh wow.
Yeah. So interesting. I don't think we kind of did a lot of my supervisors and I did a lot of discussion around, do you think it'll be different post COVID? And where we got to was no, because it wasn't talking about their current experience of well-being or their current current day. It was the concept of well-being, and that those the parts of those concepts may change and may, for example, kind of health or safety and security and those sort of things might be more prominent as COVID was striking, but they would still be all moving parts within what well-being was, if that makes sense. Like it wouldn't change the component parts of well-being.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. The only we can bring this up in a moment, I think, after we've talked about your results, but I do wonder whether, and I'm sure you don't see this as being the only answer, but when you sort of take that social constructionist view, like, does it miss the things that are good for us that we don't actually recognize are good for us? And so when it comes to, say, like people's experiences post-COVID, maybe there are some things that might people might now recognize are very
Yeah.
important to their well-being, that they may not have realized before. But
Yeah.
we can cover off on that question in a moment, because I'd like to first talk about your results. But tell me, how long did it take to analyze?
Oh, in the reflexive thematic analysis process, I used Brown and Clark's approach to reflexive thematic analysis. It never stops. You're analysing all the way up to you finish your writing. So I'm still analysing effectively because, because I'm doing the write-up at the moment. But it took me probably a good 18 months to code, which was go through. So what I did was, I had this larger sample of 1,064. I couldn't code all of those. I'd still be doing it if I was. So I did what's called kind of a nested organic sample within the sample. So I kind of used that as my population, and then I pulled. And what I tried to do was, because my work is social constructionist, and it's underpinned kind of by feminist and queer theory. I wanted to make sure that I was trying to be representative, even though it's it's a mixed method study and predominantly qualitative. So it's called big qual, little quant. So the qualitative data is the primary data source, and the quantitative data was just used to help analyze and kind of dive in a bit deeper to the qualitative results. So the so the analysis was really looking at just the qualitative. The reflexive thematic analysis is looking at purely the qualitative responses, and because I also collected, so probably not being very clear. So when you get too close to something, it's hard to to articulate it, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're doing fine.
Yeah, so I collect, because it's mixed methods, I collected the qualitative, and then I also had a whole suite of kind of well-being measures, demographics, and some Cantrell ladders like financial security, life satisfaction, and intentional pursuit of well-being. I've always really liked Sonia Lubomirsky's work on the how of happiness and the pie and this kind of intentional pursuit. So I added in these, as you can when you're writing the survey, you can add in whatever you want. So I did. So I collected a whole suite of kind of what I call the well-being data as well, and that's what So I coded all of the qualitative work, and what I wanted to make sure I was trying to be representative, which is not a concept in reflexive thematic analysis, but it is this idea that I wanted it to at least kind of look a bit like New Zealand, at least a little bit like the sample. So I wanted to, and one of my biggest frustrations in positive psychology, it speaks to that kind of weird, what we call the Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic samples, which is permeates through psychology. And it's always been one of my biggest frustrations. I pick up a piece of research and I read it. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And then I get to the end and I look at the sample, and it was like, I remember one I was doing in my master's was on mindfulness, and it turned out to be like 20-year-old white men living in central London. And I was like, how's this?
So not necessarily generalizable.
How's this relevant? Like, certainly not relevant to me. So I wanted to make sure that I was trying to make sure that this was beyond the student population 100%. So I wanted it to be a bit more kind of a picture of what New Zealand was. So I coded purposefully what's called a nested sample, and I tried to balance out sex, ethnicity, age, all of these different things, and so I ended up with a smaller sample of 476 that are coded thematically, and that's where the kind of final findings have come from that smaller subsample.
Cool. Okay, and so that half, so I guess technically you have another 18 months ahead of you if you would like to sort of confirm your analysis in the other half of the sample. Is that right?
Yeah, well, probably what I would do in an ideal world, get some more funding from somewhere, is to go now out and test what I have found and what I have developed and crafted out of their responses, and test it further afield. Maybe test it with certain populations.
Cool. And so, all right, so then you talked about this reflective thematic analysis. Can you give us a sort of a high level walkthrough of what that includes?
Yeah, so thematic analysis kind of, most people will know what that is kind of looking for shared meaning and shared ideas that are held within the data. The reflexive component that Brown and Clark talk about is kind of situating those findings in the context of the environment in which they are as well. So it's like this reflexive idea of like these findings don't just sit, they're being held by the environment that they're shared in. So understanding the place and the context of that. And then also the reflexive component of me, the researcher. So being really aware that I'm the one that is finding these people's, I'm coding. I'm the one that's crafting their responses. So me being reflexive about my input and my impact on the research. So those are that's what makes it reflexive thematic analysis. And it's a 6-stage process. So you kind of familiarize yourself with the data, you code, you go back and forth, you look for themes, you go back into the data. It's this iterative, evolving process, and then you look to confirm and define. So within reflexive thematic analysis, there's kind of these two ideas that you look at. Data can be kind of detailed and semantic and descriptive, or it can be latent and conceptual. So that's where I kind of ended up with in the findings. I found these things where people were describing very specifically what well-being was. Well-being is happiness, it's health, it's good relationships with my family. It's this descriptive list, and then well-being is being free and having a sense of balance in my life. So they're kind of more conceptual ideas, and then this target list of ideas.
Yeah, cool. All right. And so you went down this process then of reading just thousands and thousands and thousands of words, looking for sort of commonalities or themes throughout them. And then are you sort of like reporting this back to your supervisors, or how are you getting this just out of your head? Because imagine that must be so overwhelming.
Yeah, so I used InVivo, which is a software package that you can use for thematic analysis. It's really good for qualitative work. So it is it's effectively like a giant sticky note process where you can grab a piece of the data and label it something. So you code it. And so you end up with this giant coding structure that's created inductively you can do it deductively or inductively, and I used an inductive approach. So you capture that data, you create a code, and then when I find that similar sort of idea again in somebody else's sharing, I can then label it to the same code. Oh yeah, that's similar to what that person said. So at the top end, I ended up with over 140 individual codes. So this, mammoth amount of ideas. So every time the word happiness came up, every time the word optimism came up, every time family, friends, animals, all these different things came up, I coded it separately. And then you go in and you look at those codes and you try and find that kind of common and shared meaning. What are they all? What do those things kind of have in common? Oh, they're all kind of similar positive emotions, or these are all kind of challenging and hard situations they were enduring. And so you start to group together this process of kind of grouping and refining and removing duplications and merging codes until you can get it down into some sort of a structure that makes sense. So I ended up with, I think there's probably still something like 45 codes that are capturing these kind of unique ideas, and they're grouped under 7 or 8 kind of key concepts. Yeah, so it was a long process.
Great. And so just as I bet. And so these answers that people are giving, is this only to one of those 9 questions that you asked?
No, so it was across the 9 questions, which is
okay, cool.
Yeah, so all of them. So across all 9. So you bring up kind of each response and you code it. And then across all 9 questions.
Okay. And so I guess just to give a summary of where we're at before we go into sort of your final analysis, you've asked questions about, how do you define well-being? What makes it better? What makes it worse? Questions like that. You've got 500 people that have answered that, which, just as a side note, I mean, this is like 10 times bigger than the next biggest study like this. Would that be accurate to say?
I mean, I think, it's always a little bit dangerous to say it, but I don't think I've seen a study like it. So I didn't intend to do that, but I haven't. Most of the lay conception studies that I've come across, apart from Delfave's work, I don't know if it's Delfava or Delfave, who work where, and there's a couple of Canadian studies. There's a few studies where they've done this inductive idea of gathering people's ideas of what well-being is, or usually they're trying to compare it, like, what do you think well-being is versus what happiness is? I haven't seen another study this where, it was just clearly what's well-being, what makes it better and worse. So it's trying to get this holistic view of well-being, so so yes, and you're right, like sort of kind of the rule of thumb, if you want to say, like the sample size that it was supposed, is kind of recommended to be somewhere around kind of 200 to 400 people. So it's on the larger size.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm hearing again, your idea of doing an RCT during your master's against all advice. So then you go out and just do something even bigger for your PhD. So that's really cool. I love the ambition. It's awesome. So, and that's the thing I wanted to just cover off, was to make sure that anyone listening really understands that this is extremely unique, but it's also at a scale that is not even close. Like, I think if you do thematic analysis, like, you can get away with 10 to 20 people in your study, right?
Yeah. Usually, and I've got a lot of peers that are doing reflexive thematic analysis, and I'm in an amazing research community here called, and so I've got all of these amazing peers that I work with in different fields, which has been phenomenal. But they often do interviews. And it's interesting. So I had two people I worked really closely with. One was doing her thesis was on gender equality, pay equality, and the other one is a theological one within disability in the Salvation Army. So you couldn't get more different. Like, we were doing very different topics. All of us did reflexive thematic analysis, which was great. So we had that kind of common methodology that we were using. They did interviews, but they collected a similar amount of data. So like when you looked at, so they did one interview, 20, 30 pages of interview transcript versus my 1 or 2 pages per person. So so it's a different way of getting, I guess I got to more people, right, but I didn't get
maybe
deep.
Sure, I think probably I was thinking about interviews, actually. That makes more sense. But yeah, that's interesting. All right. I don't think I've ever heard of like a research group brought together by their method rather than like the research topic.
Yeah, no, it's through it's a private business called Academic Consulting. I'll do a plug for Lynn Lavery and her work. I came across Lynn through AUT, the Auckland University of Technology, and they provide this amazing kind of training for us. Like, I think, I've been quite astounded by the kind of level of support we've got from the postgraduate school around upskilling us as researchers. And Lynn is an external consultant that works with them. And so we met through her courses through the university, and now she's developed this community. And there's people from all over the world. Highly recommend it for any master's or PhD students. It's an amazing community of women and men, but mainly it is women, I must admit. We come together and we work in online sessions. We just work quietly. It's called shut up and work sessions or shut up and write sessions. And I don't know if you've ever heard of that idea, but you set a timer, you're working away at your computer, and then you have a little break and you chat to each other. And particularly during COVID, we were doing it 3-4 times a week. Amazing.
Nice. All right, I've definitely been told to shut up before, but that's about it. All right, cool. So now then, onto your results. So you've asked all these hundreds of people what well-being means to them, and what did you come up with?
Yeah. So what they came up with, and I crafted for them. And that's the reflexive component, right? So it is theirs, but I've definitely they might not have put it together the way I've put it. So that's that reflexive component. And this is, I guess, the thing I'm really interested from the academic and practitioner world is to hear what they think of this as well. Does this land for you? I'm really interested to hear your opinion, Matt. So as I said, there was kind of two types of ways in which they spoke about it. One was kind of this descriptive, detailed way, and in reflexive thematic analysis, that's kind of most suited to what's called a topic summary. So it was this pulling together of all of the ideas around the way they spoke about something, and all of the different experiences of that. So not just the flourishing or the good experiences or the high levels of well-being, but the whole picture of the way they talked about that topic. So those have been crafted into what I've called the elements. And the reason I've called them the elements is because they're the component parts of well-being. They make, from the way that people spoke, these are the core parts that make up their understanding of what well-being is. They have subparts to them and subcomponents, but these four, they kind of are represented as wheels or cogs, make up what well-being is in its whole picture. So those are called the elements because they stand individually, but together they create a whole picture. So do you want me to run through them? Or it's a kind of hard thing to talk to, isn't it, without a picture?
Please, please.
Yeah. So the first one is
I if you send me through a picture, I can put it up while we talk.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, so the first of the elements is the inner self. So that's all of the kind of internal workings of well-being and how people articulate what's going on within themselves around well-being, and that had 5 core kind of concepts that sat underneath it. There was self-awareness, which was a massive topic. So this awareness that they had to be aware of their well-being, so that they could be aware of what was going on for them, and so that they could adjust accordingly. It's kind of like the best way to think of that, to have a self-awareness so that they can be aware of what their needs are and are they meeting their needs, and how do they need to adjust for their well-being. And then next was self-care, love and acceptance. So this idea that well-being meant accepting yourself and accepting yourself for how you are in the here and now, not the perfect version of self, but the whole version and the full array of self, and accepting that, loving that, and caring for yourself. So actively caring for yourself. And the last kind of primary area there was being in control of your thoughts and emotions. So this idea that well-being is having this awareness, self-love and acceptance and caring, and that often that comes through being aware of your thoughts and controlling those thoughts and controlling your reactions, and that certainly helped to improve well-being. And then there was what I call the inner states, which are the emotions and cognitions experienced when they hear and think of the word well-being. So there was, and I've kind of broken these down into negative and positive, which is kind of a bit positive psychology-ish. But the idea of things that improve their well-being, or the idea of things that weaken their well-being, so it makes it worse. And there is, I can't even count how many different things they talk about under there. But the 4 main big ones,
I bet,
and they were substantially bigger than the rest, were happiness. So when they think of and hear of and describe well-being, they think of happiness, and they think of mindfulness and calmness, sense of peace. So those were kind of what we call the positive ones, and the ones that might be deemed negative or challenging were depression and anxiety and stress and pressure. And they were spoken about in equal proportions. So not more or less. They were equally discussed. So when people think about what makes their well-being better or worse, those are the 4 kind of main things. So I think the calmness and mindfulness it's kind of like happiness and calmness together, which I think is interesting, isn't it? Because I think we often think of well-being or flourishing as certainly high levels of well-being, whereas I think lay people they saw it more, or they see it more as kind of a balance of ups and downs. That's a simple way of putting it. So that was the first one.
Nice. That's nice. Yeah, pressure.
Yeah.
I was just going to say pressure really jumps out to me as something that you wouldn't see that in the academic literature very much.
Yeah. Yeah. And synonymous with stress. So stress and pressure. The pressure I feel in the workplace, the pressure I feel to conform, the pressure I feel to, do the right thing, or to share my time appropriately, or to take care of myself. All of those things.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it is good, isn't it?
And can I just ask? I guess that raises a question that I just realized I have, is like the purpose of this. Obviously, is the main driver to sort of seek what the academic literature has missed, or is that not really the frame that you're looking at?
So there was three research questions, or there are three research questions. So what do lay people, how do they conceptualize what well-being is? So, and I've kind of, in my mind, I kind of articulate that as a mapping of well-being. And that comes from a conversation, just to drop a name, with Robert Biswas-Diener that I was having. And he's such an amazing guy. And he just, I was talking to him about something else, some work we were doing. And then he and I ended up having this conversation about my PhD, and he was so generous. He stayed on the call for an hour and chatted to me about lay conceptions.
Cool.
And he talked
Seriously?
about... Yeah, like an hour and a half, actually. He was just phenomenal. And then he wrote me a summary of what he thought we'd talked about. It's just, he's amazing. I have such admiration.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, really good. And he's actually really interested in lay conceptions. And he said his dad had always talked about the way he kind of considered the way he approached well-being was that it was about mapping well-being, and it really resonated for me. That's what I kind of see this first part of my own study is about mapping what well-being is. So it's not that it's right or wrong, but it's just mapping the territory. What are all the different parts of it? How do lay people conceptualize it? Mapping it out as this giant map, and it is. I've got a big map. Got it in front of me. I'll send it through to you. Cool. That's the first question. The second question is how do different groups compare? Do men and women, trans, non-binary people talk about it differently, similarly? I haven't, to be honest, I haven't been able to really achieve that one fully, because it's effectively a whole nother round of thematic analysis. So I've done that statistically. I've looked at the statistical results there, and that's the next PhD. And then the last one is what you're talking about before, which is the third question, was how do these lay conceptions compare to prominent wellbeing theories, models, and measures? So, and that's where your work actually has come in beautifully to play. I'm very grateful for the systematic review that you guys did, and Linton and a few other people at Kelpie have done as well. Kelpie, I don't know how to pronounce her name. So those are the three kind of parts. So it wasn't, I guess I'm focusing on the difference, not the similarity as much. But that's probably more just because of a space and time thing. Looking at where the gaps are.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the element.
So sorry, please continue.
No worries. So the first element, inner self, so all the inner workings. The next element, which I think, I shouldn't be, but I think it maybe is a little bit surprising, and it's certainly outside of the prominent theory, is material stability. So that's around security and comfort and having your basic needs met. And the stability component of that material is really important. So it's not just financial stability. I chose the word materials very specifically because it's like around the security of housing, security of income, security, paid work, or income stream. All of those, the stable security of those elements, and the profound impact that has on people's well-being, and the opportunity that affords them to have well-being, to pursue well-being, and to not feel stress and pressure and things that are depleting of well-being. So that's the second component.
Cool. Did safety come up there?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, like safe environments and feeling safe. Not as much as I probably maybe expected. And maybe that's part of maybe being in New Zealand, and it'll be interesting to test that in other countries, where maybe security and safety, physical safety is more
I guess
important.
it's almost taken for granted, basically, safety. Yeah.
We've got, effectively we've got low crime in comparison to other countries. And so, that's sort of the context stuff. Will be interesting to test that elsewhere. But it definitely came out. But it probably, that safety, I think, more came up in what we might kind of classify as like emotional safety, or, around things like racism and homophobia and transphobia, sexism.
Sure. Okay.
Those things. Yeah. So that lack of safety was really evident there.
Okay.
Okay. And then
like you say, a huge missing gap in the sort of the.
Yeah. It is and it isn't. So what I've found is, I picked 4 prominent theories to compare to, which were Corey Keyes' dual continuum. So that's probably, that's part of how we met. Ed Diener and Felicia Huppert, and Huppert and So's flourishing models, and Seligman's PERMA. And I picked those 4 because lots of other people have picked those 4. They're quite prominent. They were, in positive psychology, when I did my master's, they were what I was taught. So these are the ideas of kind of our idea of well-being is kind of captured in those 4. But then what I found was, as I was doing, as the findings were kind of becoming more and more apparent, I went and looked to see, is there any more, is there some recent models, or is there different models that I haven't come across? And I found another 4 models, all of which, which I've elected to kind of bring into the comparison. PERMA plus 4, so Donaldson's work on that, Van der Weel's flourishing. And you'll remember Gallup, and what's the 4th one? It'll come back to me.
It's all right. It's not a test.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so yes.
All right, so that's the next element.
Yeah, so it's not as prevalent, but it is actually now, right? There's this real clear evidence that material stability is important, and it is starting to show up in our models. So our models and theories. So I think we can say, that there's a growing awareness of the importance of material and financial stability. And the third element is health. So again that because a lot of our models are subjective well-being, right? Like a mental well-being. And I think, you would talk about this in the work that you guys do as well, right? I think you talk about well-being as mental well-being a lot, don't you, in the work you do?
Yeah, we never know what to call it, though, to be honest with you. But yeah.
So the physical well-being side of it has often not been included because we kind of neck up. And so the physical was, again, another really profound. So that's got 2 core areas under it. The first one is physical health, what I call the eat, sleep, move code, which is all of the references around, the decisions people make and the awareness they have around eating well, sleeping well, moving well for their well-being, and the impact of not doing those things. So that's a big kind of physical health one. And then the second one, which was, a bit different and a bit surprising to me, was what I've called health care, which is the access to care. So access to medication, professional help, all of those, the access to healthcare. So the things that support their health and their well-being. It covers off things like mental health care, addiction, substance abuse, and a lot of discussion around sickness, disability, pain, and disease. And I guess that's what I got out by asking them what makes your well-being worse. I got that whole picture of well-being. So kind of bringing in that disability as well.
Yeah, and is that where mental illness sits then in your model?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 elements.
Okay,
that's 3 elements.
3 elements, and the 4th element, lucky last, is connection. Unsurprisingly, I think. So connection, and in there you've got the types of connection and the characteristics of connection. So this is the way This is the different types of connection they talked about and the way they talked about those connections. So I've separated it out into two separate areas. And so the types of connection are much broader than what we often find. So often we find in our models positive social relationships, or positive relationships. So a lot of human contact, and lay people
interpersonal.
Interpersonal. Yeah, they talk about broader than that. So they talk about friends and family and community. They also talk a lot about pets and animals. So the same amount of people talked about their relationship with their pets and animals as they did about religion, and spirituality.
Okay.
That kind of surprised me. I don't know why, but workplace connections and kind of context specific to New Zealand, Indigenous Te Ao Māori, so things to do with Māori worldview and the Indigenous population that came through, and particularly around that desire to have connection to their worldview, their belief structures, and connection to land and whenua. So the word whenua in New Zealand means land, but it also means placenta. So it's really interesting. That came through things. So the importance of language there. So so it's connection to land, connection to birthplace. So that's really important kind of nuances there in connection, isn't it?
Interesting.
Yeah, really beautiful.
And were people writing those words in the Maori language?
Yeah, they were. So I've got a number of so I've got that all through my thesis. I've got the translations of those meanings.
Cool.
Yeah, so 17% of the sample identified.
And what about? Okay. And what about the direction of relationships? Because I think something that we've noticed, it's something I'll share with you soon, I think, Annalise, because you brought up the work that we did, and the next thing that we've done is we've got these different dimensions. I've mentioned it probably on every episode of this show so far, but with each of the 21 or so dimensions that we found, when we went to the item level of those dimensions, like the questions that the surveys actually asked, we were able to group them into even smaller groupings. And I have to say those groupings sound very, very similar to the stuff that we're running through now. So that's kind of interesting. It'll be exciting to sort of map them across. But one that I think took me by surprise, was the direction of the relationship. So it was not just like I care for others, but that others care for me. Did that come across?
Yeah, absolutely. So the bi-directional nature, definitely, and the ripple effect, kind of that contagion effect, realizing, kind of connection is about who they surround themselves with, and so what they give as well as what they receive. So like under that characteristics part of connection.
Yeah.
So the top two were, there's four were the biggest topics that came up. Love and being heard and understood were the two kind of most substantial ones, and that definitely was bi-directional, right? So love was definitely about giving love and receiving love, and being surrounded by people that love you and your loved ones, and there was a sense of sort of security and safety that came with that, and being heard and understood, so kind of being seen in the world and being understood for who you are. And then equally spoken about were the toxicity and the negativity of relationships and loneliness and isolation. So, that are fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah, right? They speak about those things in equal proportion. So there's kind of the way I kind of left my feeling of connection was connection's really important, and we hear that all the time in positive psychology. It's the biggest indicator of well-being, but also not all connection's good for us. So, that's kind of
interesting. And was that the one where, so you sort of use that dialectic word, this idea that these things can go they can go well or poorly for you? Was that the one that had the most equal proportions of good to bad?
And also the inner states around kind of positive and negative emotions and cognitions, that was equally dialectical as well, because that's where you had depression, anxiety, stress, pressure, as well as happiness and calm. So, so what under the models might be captured as positive emotions, some of them talk about, and you will have noticed, like you said, at the indicator level, some talk about negative emotions as well, don't they? But it doesn't kind of make it through to the top level of the model or the theory. Yeah. So
yeah, great. Okay, cool.
So that's the 4 elements, and that's the way I describe it. Those are the kind of moving parts of well-being. And I'll say now I'm going to assume that there's a picture up on screen for people to understand what this model looks like. So those cogs are, the component parts, and whatever may be playing out for somebody at a certain time may make a particular cog more important right now, or might be where their attention's kind of focused. But they're all there, and they're all important equally to give a holistic picture of well-being. And then the next thing...
And can I ask then, like, if we said... Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, like, when are you saying someone has well-being? Like, is that where this is going? Like, are you saying, like, you have to be satisfied with all 4 of these aspects of your life to be well? Like, how do you sort of explain that?
Good question. I don't think I'm at that point. I guess it's more descriptive again. It's more mapping. It's describing what well-being is, and it has these parts to it, and what they mean will be different for different people, and the role they're playing at this point in time in their life, will depend on what's going on for them. But I'd like to test it, but I hazard that they're probably pretty consistent, these 4 things, as making up.
Okay, so it's more saying when. So it's just that this is a descriptive model of when you ask people what makes up well-being, these are the 4 things that come up.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so I wouldn't say, I suppose if you have high levels of them, or they're working, I guess maybe that takes me to the next thing, which is the golden threads. And I think, So as I was saying, in reflexive thematic analysis, there's these kind of descriptive bundles that you push everything together. You get this dialectical experience, capturing of the participants' responses. That's what the elements are. And then you have the themes, which are these more conceptual, latent, kind of slightly, maybe hidden, or kind of, you got to kind of read between the lines to find the meaning, but they permeate across the different discussions. And so I've identified these 3 golden threads, and I use the term golden thread building on Tim Lomas's work in happiness and balance and harmony. I don't know if you've had a chance to read his work, but he talks about the golden threads as something that permeates across and kind of holds together and gives value to something. So what I found was when the participants were talking about well-being, there was these other ideas going on that are kind of not as nuts and bolts as the component parts, but they were the actual functioning of well-being, if that makes sense. Like, so the way I depict it,
not really, but I'm sure.
They're kind of like they're the things that thwart and support well-being. That's how I articulated them. So they were how people described their well-being. They were how they made sense of their well-being, and they were the things that made them feel they had well-being or stopped them from having well-being, with these kind of bigger ideas. So I'll run through them because I think they'll make sense when you hear them. So the first one is balance. So the notion that well-being has many parts, and those parts are social, psychological, emotional, relational, or they can be different parts of like work life. There's different parts to well-being. So there's this idea that well-being has many parts, and those parts are individual to the person, and what's important for me may not be important for you, and that really what we're trying to do is balance. So, and that's the word they use. Tim would have used the word harmonizing, but the word balance is what came through really clearly in the lay conceptions, is this idea that they're constantly having to balance. Am I balancing enough time on caring for myself and enough time on caring for my family? Enough time at work, enough time at play, enough time on my health, enough time on my rest. Those sort of, this idea that they were balancing, and I think that part of what comes through there is time was a really significant topic. So balance was, I think, mentioned by 87% of the sample. It's a big topic. And time was a
Really?
kind of subtopic that came through, where they talk about time as this commodity, like having time, spending time, needing time, wanting time, being time poor. And balance. So I put those together as, so time balance is achieved through kind of the use of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is the idea of, balance is something that you're seeking, and then the next golden thread is active pursuit.
Yep.
So this is the idea that well-being is something we it's a constant process, and it's something that we actively have to pursue. It's not fixed. You don't get to well-being. They didn't articulate it as like, well, if I do really well on a Sunday, I have well-being. That's not how. It's this constant process that they're working at. They know that they have to do things on it. They know they have to have the awareness and the self-care and the self-love, and that they have to work on their connection with other people. So this idea that it's this active, constant pursuit. And the last one is freedom, which I think is another really interesting area. When they talked about the sense of being free to be who they are. So well-being is being free to be who you are in all of those different ways. So the kind of things that came up there were like a lot of stuff around homophobia and transphobia, like living in safe environments. So you're talking about before around safety, sort of well-being is really clearly thwarted by not being in safe environments, sexist environments, racist, a lot of stuff around racism, colonialism, which is, maybe again contextually more relevant here in New Zealand, and it'd be interesting to test that elsewhere. So that was free from what I've got, free for these kind of external oppressive systems, and then free to, so material stability comes in there, like, so free to pursue, free to have the knowledge, and free to have the material needs that they need to pursue their well-being. So kind of these nuances that came through in freedom, and it's kind of really built on that to me is really linked to the capability work that Lindsay's doing with the well-being literacy, that well-being is context, it's related to the environment, so can you be well? That's really the question, like, are people able to even have well-being in the environment that they're in?
Yeah, okay. And so I know I've, like, spoilers alert, because I got to see your video for your IPPA conference presentation, but I noticed that one of the things you said was missing from, like, when you compare the sort of the wellbeing models to what you've found, one of them was autonomy. And I wonder whether this could have actually been called autonomy.
Yeah.
Because it does speak very similarly to this idea of, like, confidence to speak your opinions, to feel your opinions, to live your life as you like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, funnily you should say that, because you're not the only person that said that. Lindsay mentioned it as well. I think what,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There you go.
is this just autonomy? But it's different in that autonomy is that internal sense of, am I autonomous? Am I an autonomous being able to, self-efficacy, right? Can I do what I want to do, and does it bring about what I wanted it to bring about doing that? Can I go to the gym, and does going to the gym get me fitter or healthier or whatever it is? Whereas the way that this is spoken about is what's done to them. It's these external systems. So it's not their ability, so it's not their ability to just toughen through racism. It's not like just put on your racism, superhero suit and go out and be fine with the racism, which is kind of what we're implying if we're saying it's autonomy, So I think it's more than that. It's this appreciation for the hostile nature of some environments for people and their well-being. Is that kind of articulate the difference? So when I depict it in my mind, freedom is the bird flying free from the cage. The cage is the environment.
I guess probably. I would say I agree with you. I guess what you've described is probably how I defined autonomy. But I get your point.
Yeah.
There's a difference between the sort of like the finger pointing sort of get through it versus the real life conditions of what someone's living through. So fair enough.
Yeah, kind of what's done to you.
All right, cool. And so,
Mm.
right. Yeah. No, I get that for sure. So what next? That's the model.
Yeah. So that's the model. And I
we
guess
haven't missed anything yet, have we? I haven't dropped the gun?
No. I think one of the other big things that I think, I don't know if it's missing or just wasn't there, and that I think would be good to talk about, because is meaning and purpose. That is just something that wasn't evident when people would just ask, describe what well-being is for you. How do you define and describe it? They didn't talk about. They talked about having some meaningful. Some people, a small percentage of people, talked about having meaningful work, or it was predominantly located around work. But people did not talk about living a life of purpose or living a life of meaning or pursuing something that was meaningful and purposeful for them. I think it was implied. Not taking away, from people having meaningful lives. And I think that if you ask them directly, like we do in these scale questions, we ask them, do you live a meaningful life? Is your life worthwhile? In this general sense, that people, would no doubt have a notion of what that is, but it's not how they articulated well-being. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that probably gets that difference that I wanted to sort of come back to. Maybe it's a good time to bring it up now. This idea of, the sort of that social constructionist approach to well-being compared to this sort of top-down positivist sort of this, the experts told us this is good for you sort of thing. So I guess there's almost a risk there if you go like something as central to well-being, at least central as far as academics would say, something like having a sense of meaning and purpose. What do we do about that sort of from the lay perspective, the fact that it's missing?
Is it is that,
how should I interpret that almost is my question.
And I think maybe that's what I need to go and find out some more about, like how should we interpret that, like is it just not how they articulate it, but they just don't use the words meaning and purpose, but it's there? Or is it not well-being? Is it not something they think of when they think of the word well-being? Is it still meaning and purpose? But I don't think that. I don't think of that when I think of well-being. Or do they not know it's really important? This is the question. That's, I guess I'm just left with more questions, because I think, like you said, we have been told how important it is, and the research seems to point to it being really important. To have meaning and purpose and direction in life. And I know myself, like when I'm at times in life where I don't feel like I've got kind of a direction or, something that I'm pursuing that I think is meaningful, I do feel a bit lost, and I do feel without purpose. So I feel like maybe it's the thing that we can give back. Like lay people have developed, they've told us all of this stuff. Maybe we can go and tell them now, hey, but maybe one thing you don't know about is meaning and purpose. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that's interesting though. You're right, because I guess that's a nice nuance, I think, of like, just because it didn't come up doesn't mean people don't value it. It just at minimum means it's not something they're associating with well-being. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's exactly. Almost like completely fine, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I guess, the difference, inductive, deductive, right? Like, do I go out with a scale and say, here's 10 things, rate, do you agree these 10 things are a part of well-being? How much do you agree? Or here's a piece of paper, list everything that's well-being to you.
Gotcha.
Both ways, you got a chance of missing things, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, absolutely. And I think that's I don't think anyone who's fighting for lay perspectives is going out there saying we should only listen to people, right? It's a combination of both, unless I'm mistaken. No,
I think if anything for me, it's kind of valuing the lived experience of well-being. Like, I think sometimes I feel like that gets a little lost in the work we're doing. Like I think most of us that come to positive psychology, wellbeing science, we're here because we want to make the world a better place. We want to help people live lives that are flourishing and impactful and happy and healthy and safe and all of those things. But sometimes we kind of forget, well, there's people that are actually living those lives. Like, let's go and ask them. Rather than let's be the expert and tell them, let's make it, a co-designed. There you go. I never thought of it this way before, but it's kind of like a co-designing of a model of well-being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, awesome. And so, conscious of your time, my last question, I guess, is what's next for you?
Yeah, many things. So I guess the next thing I'd like, in terms of the research, is finishing the PhD, top of the list, and I'd love to test the model elsewhere. I'd love to kind of test its robustness. I'd like to see if it stands up. If like you said, if there's some other gaps, and would I now kind of put meaning and purpose in there, and go and test that. And so that might involve developing a measure. I'm a little bit adverse to that because I don't want to put them into boxes. I guess beyond that, I'm looking to develop this now into a program. So to develop this into a wellbeing program that people can learn. So that intersection between positive psychology interventions and this model. And how can we help people to, work on those elements and work on those golden threads in their life to support their well-being.
Cool. And that's where I guess the wellbeing literacy stuff ties straight back in.
Yeah, exactly. So this is all wellbeing literacy, I think, isn't it?
Great.
It's the language that people use. And then the course, I guess, is around helping them to kind of broaden their understanding of their own idea of well-being, broadening their idea of what well-being is, hearing from other people what well-being is for them, and then practicing a whole bunch of ways that you can kind of improve and, buffer your well-being. And then, so all of that is around increasing your literacy around well-being for yourself and for others, and hopefully for the planet, and, all of its occupants. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Very cool. I mean, congratulations on some seriously impressive work. I just
Thanks, man.
I'm so pleased that the outcomes from it, to be honest with you, like how far it's come since we first spoke. And I hope that people sort of stand up and pay attention to this, because it's I think it's really, really powerful. And to be honest, it's probably something that many people were calling for. At IPPA, that's probably the thing that I didn't mention. So I mean, anything else that we haven't covered that you wanted to mention?
No, I mean, I've lost complete track of time, so I have no idea where we are. Which is that
Okay.
Obviously, was a little bit in flow.
For about an hour and 20.
So I think
Yeah, nice. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, Chick sent me home would obviously think we were flowing away there, or I was at least. I'd love to hear what you think. If you think there's, was there anything surprising, anything expected to be there that wasn't there, or that you would put in there?
Look, I don't necessarily think there was anything missing, and I guess it's almost like, who am I to say what's missing in a sense? But I think the bit that I'm coming away most interested by, I think, is your separation of like the golden threads versus the elements. I think that's really nice, because it's probably something that, at least on this show, has been a criticism of PERMA, say, by some of the work that Fallon Goodman's done, almost like this confusion between what's an outcome, what's a driver. And I think that your model has nicely pulled that apart of like, what are the descriptive elements of well-being versus what are these sort of, like you say, the things that thwart or support well-being. So I think that's really strong. But the bit, I guess, almost like selfishly, that I think I'm so excited about is this dialectic conceptualization of all of these different elements, because I think that's the truth of sort of the dual continuum model. That's the true direction, as far as I see it, that the future is not just, high versus low well-being and high versus low distress. It's like at each of these conceptual elements or these descriptive elements that they can be positively or negatively like valence, so they can be the presence or the absence of all of each of them. So it's about bringing almost the dual continuum model idea to the individual elements, rather than to the sort of the more general overarching umbrella concept.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great way of putting it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does, definitely. And I think, the dual continuum or the dialectical, I think, is exactly like, is that mapping of well-being. Those things coexist, right? We have suffering and happiness and joy. They're all part of the human experience and human condition. And, that dialectical notion of, I myself am somebody who suffered from depression for most of my life. I've had depressive episodes. Probably what drew me to this work, and those that whole idea of post-traumatic growth. They definitely have also been the thing that have grown me and expanded me. Is also that experience of depression. Would I like to have learnt it a different way? 100%. Like, I'd love to be able to find a different way to get that learning.
Sure.
So I think there's that dialectical nature and that, like you said, that dual continuum. It doesn't, you don't just sit at one end of the continuum. You can have well-being and be struggling.
Yep. No, for sure. And so, I mean, this sounds, I'm really excited to see where this goes. I'm really excited, I think, for us to sit down and sort of map out how our stuff is looking compared to your stuff. I think that will be really fun to do. Yeah. But just on that dialectic thing, I just sort of read. Okay, perfect. Yeah, well, let's do it. Let's actually set up a time. But the dialectic thing, just the only other thought that came to my mind was I just read Gad Saad's book on happiness, and you can think what you think about Gad Saad, that's fine. But the reason why I read it and I reviewed it on the show was that it will be the most popular, like it will be the most sold book of happiness ever written, I think, just purely by the fact of online popularity. And so anyway, but one thing I really took away from the book was I think he did a really good job of something that we don't do a very good job of, I think, at least in the sort of the happiness space, is giving people a reason why they should do this. And I think we often just say, like, it's good for you, so you should do it. Whereas I think some of his elements, he's really contextualized them in comparison to something that we really don't want. And I can imagine that, like, I think the example that he gave was like authenticity as a protective idea against future regret. So like if you're really authentic to who you are, that's almost like a protection from regretting in the future what you could have done or what you should have done.
Yeah.
And I could imagine that, like, talking about now turning what you've got into a program, the sort of the dialectic nature of some of these things might be really valuable for sort of like motivating and inspiring people to be focusing on these things.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of resourcing them, I guess, is the way I like to look at it. Like, that's what any programs I've ever done or coaching I do. I feel like it's my kind of analogy I always use is a smorgasbord. Like, if you just put it out there, give people the opportunity to learn about it, practice it, talk about it, think about it, reflect on it, go away, throw it away, come back, pick it up. It gives them a chance to kind of embed it and have that in their pack, in their resource when they need it, to be able to call on it when they need it. So they might not, they might not respond to mindfulness or meditation practice, but at some point in time, they might just slow their breathing and pause their reaction and not yell at somebody. So there might be these on-flow effects they don't know as mindfulness meditation practice, but it's resourced them in other ways. And I guess that's what I saw your podcast come out with Gad, and that's on my list of viewing. But I wonder, I think you can't not be well-being, right? Like, well-being is just life. Like, it is life. Like, well-being is life. There is you can't un-well-being. We are well-being. That's the thing that is kind of most profound for me when we think,
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Annalise. This has been it's been an hour and a half. It has absolutely flown by. Really look forward to what you've got in store, and yeah, let's obviously keep in touch.
And I'd love to hear from anybody, from yourself and anybody who's listening. I've put a survey up on my website, which I'll share with you, Matt, that for people to give feedback on the model or feedback on anything that I've shared about. So
Oh, great.
feel free to go in there. And it's an emerging model, definitely open to feedback and honing. And, I would like something to come of it. I'm not sure what it is yet, but, obviously there's a lot of people put a lot of... have given a lot to me that I've then spent quite a bit of time on crafting. So I'd like to do something with it.
Fantastic. All right. Well, send me that link and I'll put it in the show notes. Otherwise, yeah, thank you again.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Annalise Roache, and it's my great pleasure to be here today to share with you my doctoral research findings on the lay conceptions of wellbeing and empirical study of New Zealand adults, and in particular, the results of the reflexive thematic analysis process, which developed the model of elemental wellbeing. Beaming in from New Zealand, and I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I hope you're having a wonderful time, and I'd like to extend my thanks to IPPA for allowing me to present in this format. And I'd like to give a special thanks to my guides and guardians, my supervisors, Dr. Elizabeth Dupreez at Auckland University of Technology and Professor Lindsay Odes at the University of Melbourne. Forever grateful. So I came to positive psychology through my practice as a coach. And one of the things that I've always noticed is the difference between how my clients talked about well-being and how research scholars and the literature talks about what well-being is. And so that's always been the burning question for me, and that's the center of my research. What exactly is well-being, this concept that we're talking about? And in particular, how do lay people conceptualize well-being? And how do they define and describe it, and what makes it better and worse for them? And then to look at differences between groups. So do men and women and trans and non-binary people talk about it in similar ways? And then to compare those lay concepts with prominent wellbeing theories, models, and measures in positive psychology. But at the heart of the study is this desire to amplify lay voices. So I won't go on too deeply about the study design, but here is a bit of information for you. So it's founded in feminist, intersectional, and queer theory, critical realism, and social constructionism. It's a mixed method, so there was qualitative and quantitative data, but the qualitative data is the driving principal source of data, and it was an embedded convergent design, so the data was all collected at once. And the main purpose is really to explore and to describe, and it's an inductive approach. So I took a blank piece of paper to the data and started from scratch rather than arriving with a framework and trying to look for different ideas within the data. So the survey was collected through an anonymous online survey, which involved open-ended questions about what is wellbeing, how do you define it, describe it, what makes it better and worse, a series of demographics, and a series of wellbeing self-report measures. The population was a general sample of over 1,064 responded to the survey. They were New Zealand adults, and they were asked to self-select if they considered themselves to be wellbeing experts to remove themselves from the study. And so the sampling was a non-probability convenience sample. And then within that larger sample of 1,000, over 1,000, I coded thematically 476. So that resulted in over 200,000 words and 100,000 pieces of numerical data. So quite a lot to digest. So as I said, there was different ways in which I analysed the data. So I looked at the whole data set, looking for frequency and the most common words. And then I looked at the reflexive, doing a reflexive thematic analysis process, which looks for common themes and shared meaning that the participants shared. And then how I crafted those as the researcher was the process of the reflexive analysis. So I used Brown and Clark's model of reflexive thematic analysis, and identified, I got at the top end about 140 different codes, and that's now been narrowed down to 7 core codes and themes, which you will see today. And then, as I said, the comparative analysis, which unfortunately I won't have time to present much on today. So what did I find? So when I looked at the qualitative data, the qualitative responses, I found two key kind of ways that people talked about well-being. One was really specific and descriptive and semantic, so it gave me the details of what well-being was and how they define and describe it. And then there were these more latent or conceptual sort of ideas that ran through those core details. And so the first is what I've termed the elements. So I've selected that term because element is something that's defined as being a necessary or typical part of something, one of several parts that something contains. So the elements, of which there are 4, are the component parts of well-being, according to this sample. The elements of well-being outline the semantic approach, so they're explicit descriptions of how lay people define and describe well-being. And each one represents the dialectical nature of that experience of well-being. So it's the whole experience, which means that it covers topics which may be deemed positive or negative. And these are cognitions, emotions, experiences, and relationships, all contained within the element. So each element is unique in and of itself, and it holds its own essential characteristics. But standing alone, one element is not a whole picture of well-being. So the elements can be considered the component parts, and taken together, they form this holistic view of well-being, according to this sample. So next is the ideas that permeate through the elements, what's been termed the golden threads. Now, the golden threads can be defined as a feature or an idea that is present in all parts of something, and it holds those parts together, and it gives them value. So this is building on Tim Lomas's work. And in this study, it became apparent as I analysed that there were these concepts that traversed across the elements. They were more conceptual thinking, and that's where I came across Tim's work on the golden threads. So Tim talks about the golden threads having 3 functions. They're analytical, so that they're a means for people to understand and evaluate. They're motivational, so they act as guides to choices and actions. And they're axiological, so in and of themselves, they are valued life outcomes. So the golden threads appear to act as this unifying principle that pertains to all the elements, and they act as mechanisms that thwart or support well-being. So what are they? So firstly, of the 4 elements, the first element is the inner self. So this encapsulates how lay people speak about all of those kind of internal workings. 97% of the sample discussed this topic, and it has 5 main component parts. It's awareness of self, self-care, love and acceptance, being in control of thoughts and emotions, and the full spectrum of inner states. Again, this dialectical nature coming through. So we have positive inner states, which are described as happiness, mindfulness, calmness, and negative, which are also spoken about at equal proportions: depression, anxiety, stress, and pressure. So, and there's a myriad of other states that they talk about, that these are the prominent ones. Next, we have the second element of material stability. And now this is described as being vital to well-being, and it's hinged on financial and material security in the form of steady and fair income, appropriate housing, and having all of the basic needs met. And that brings a sense of security. And so without this material stability, there's uncertainty, stress, anxiety, and it's most often described as being thwarted by systematic things like poverty, homelessness, and failing state systems or hostile cultural norms. We heard things like discussions around sexism. 37% of the sample discussed this topic. Now that's completely unprompted. Remember, they weren't given any prompts to say, do you think material stability is important to your well-being? It's completely unprompted. And it does resonate with a growing awareness in our models and theories around the importance of financial and material security. So stability yields a sense of safety and autonomy, to have our needs met, to care for ourselves and for our extended family, and a means to access care. So with material stability, one's full potential can be realized with the opportunity for fun, relaxation, and enjoyment. The third element is health. 86% of the sample talked about these topics, and it's divided into 2 subcategories. Firstly, physical health, or what I refer to as the Eat, Sleep, Move code, which is where participants talk about the impact of food and exercise on well-being, and the activities and choices, opportunities, and the access to influence their well-being that they have. And they talk about, secondly, healthcare and the experience of and access to care in all of its form. So that includes medication, healthcare professionals, and also a lot of discussion around addiction, unhealthy substances, mental illness, mental ill health, sickness, disease, pain, and disability. So those really came through in this discussion around what is health in association to wellbeing. And lastly, and probably unsurprisingly, the fourth element is connection, something that we all know is very significant to wellbeing, and 87% of the sample talked about connection in some capacity. So connection in this element has two parts to it. It's the types of connection and the characteristics of those connections. So those connections can be fleeting and long-lasting, and there was a real appreciation for the bidirectional ripple effect, contagion effect of connection on wellbeing. So of the types of wellbeing, we've got family, friends, Indigenous to our Māori, so Indigenous to New Zealand concepts coming through, pets and animals, community, spirituality and religiosity, and workplace. So friends and family were discussed the most, but for me, it was quite surprisingly, 35% of the sample talked about nature and the importance of connection to nature. And only 1 in 10 talked about spirituality, which was the same as those that talked about pets and animals and the connections and the importance that has on their wellbeing. So for the characteristics of a connections, again, we see this equal proportion of discussion around what may be deemed positive and what may be deemed negative aspects and characteristics of connection. So they equally talked about the importance of love and being heard and understood, as they did about isolation, disconnection, toxicity, and relationships. So while connection is definitely a central tenet of wellbeing, it's clearly not all good for us. So beyond the elements, so we've got the 4 elements, now we move to the golden threads. So the golden threads, of which there are 3, are the unifying principles that unify the elements, and they act as mechanisms that thwart or support wellbeing. So the first one is balance. 83% of the sample talked about this. And they talked about that wellbeing has many parts. So it's a holistic concept, but it has lots of facets and domains. They're mental, emotional, physical, social, spiritual. And that wellbeing is the experience of balancing those different parts of life. So whether it's balancing the different domains, or balancing emotional experiences of positive and negative, or balancing the amount of time that they spend on care for themselves or care for others, or in relationship to others. The time was a very substantial topic, time use. Time as a commodity, something that they see that impacts their well-being. And within this golden thread, we see that well-being is an individual idea. It's something that individuals will view differently, and that what one may think is necessary for improving or deteriorating their well-being may not be shared by others. So there was an appreciation for this difference in well-being. Next, we have active pursuit, which was discussed by 54% of the sample, so again, fully unprompted. And this is really the notion that wellbeing is an active pursuit. It's a constant process, and it's something that we do to bring about our wellbeing is the choices that we make about the hobbies and passions and the creative pursuits that we do, and particularly doing things that we love. That came through really clearly. Spending time doing things I love. Pursuing goals and gaining a sense of achievement and success was kind of secondary to hobbies and passion pursuits, but still substantial. And then lastly, the golden thread of freedom. So depicted here is the bird flying free from the cage. So 1 in 4 participants talked about this notion of freedom, and it has 2 parts: to be free from and free to. So freedom from is living free from abrasive systems and cultural norms that thwart or deplete wellbeing. There was a discussion around poverty, colonialism, racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism. And then freedom to is having a stable means, so material resources, knowledge, experiences, to be able to pursue activities that are beneficial to your well-being. So the freedom to pursue. And this work, this notion of the golden thread is very much informed by Sin and Nussbaum's work on the capability approach to well-being. And in particular, this idea that freedom purports the ability to achieve well-being in a matter of what people are able to do and to be, and then thus the kind of life that they are effectively able to lead. So freedom, I think, is a really interesting golden thread that's come through that's definitely I'm looking forward to exploring further. So how do they all come together? So what does this model look like? So this model is, you can see depicted as the four elements are viewed as the wheels and cogs of well-being. So these, and they may vary in size or significance depending on what's going on for somebody, but these are the four kind of constant cogs of well-being. And they are enlivened and brought to life by the golden threads that run around the outside of them, a bit like if you imagined the chain on a bicycle. So the chain, if it's running smoothly, well-being is flowing and these elements are flowing smoothly and life is going good. And if they've got kinks in them or they need a little bit of oil, they get a bit stuck, well-being is much harder to pursue. The elements are harder to flow. And so, yeah, these showing that interrelationship between the elements and the golden thread. So how does this compare to prominent theories, models and measures, of which I'm sure as you're sitting there, you've been thinking yourself, yes, that sounds familiar, or that's a bit different than what I expected. Well, what I can say is that, firstly, how do they compare? Well, not easily. It was actually a very difficult process to look to compare the models, measures and theories used within wellbeing, because they really are all developed differently. So they're all developed with different definitions in mind. There's different ways in which the models have been developed, through its population level data, through the mental or subjective wellbeing approaches, the tripartite approach, eudaimonic, hedonic focuses. So it was really very hard. And as the picture depicts, it was not apples for apples, it was apples for oranges. So I picked four prominent theories to compare to before I started the research. It was Key's complete state, Seligman's PERMA, Huppert and Stowe, and Diener's flourishing. Now these have been used a lot for other comparisons, and that's why I picked them. And then post-analysis, when I became apparent as to kind of what was in the lay theories, I've added four new or more recent measures, Van der Waals flourishing, self-determination theory, Gallup's 5 elements of wellbeing, so 3 new ones. And then I also did a substantial compare and contrast to 3 really amazing systematic reviews that have been done by Linton et al., Ayasiello et al., and Kilpie et al., and I highly recommend that you look at these if you're into this work. They've identified over 400 domains of wellbeing, and they reduced them down to between 6 and 21 domains, depending on the study. So between them, they've reviewed over 250 measures and 44 distinct models of wellbeing. So I used those to compare along with the theories to see how do these compare. So as I said, it wasn't easy to look at what the differences and the gaps are, but what did I find? I found that really the types of wellbeing, it really depends on what type of wellbeing. Other theories are asserting that they're mental wellbeing, psychological wellbeing, or general wellbeing. So in most of the prominent ones, we don't see physical health and material stability, but in the newer ones we do. So there is that growing realization that physical health and material stability are elements, and lay people can confirm that for us. The golden threads are all relatively new concepts, perhaps with the exception of active pursuits, which has a flavor of engagement that's prominent in other theories. Balance is a reoccurring concept that's coming through in lay conceptions, and perhaps is now time something for us to bring into our wellbeing theories. Freedom and the impact of oppressive systems and norms is kind of seen through the waves of positive psychology, and definitely would be worthy of some more investigation. The concepts that weren't strongly present in the lay concepts is meaning and purpose. It really was a very, very, very minor topic. And that in itself is interesting to explore further, is that people don't see it as a concept they associate with well-being. Would it be good for them to associate it more with well-being? That definitely is something that's worthy of more investigation. And also the ideas around competency and autonomy, it's just not how lay people discussed well-being. And so it'd be interesting to understand how the notions are there, but how it's articulated is different. So in terms of the elements in inner self, most similarity is seen obviously with positive emotions, but there's definitely gaps around self-awareness and self-love, which just isn't seen in many of the models. And again, this dialectical nature of well-being, the full spectrum of emotions from happiness through to depression and anxiety. For health, looking beyond the physical to this access to care, and also experiences of how pain and disability influence well-being. And then interconnection, so there's far greater variety and nuance in the types, particularly non-human forms of connection. And the characteristics, again, this dialectical nature, sort of beyond the positive. So what's the next steps? Well, to look at prominent findings in more depth, to look at the golden threads and the freedom and balance, and to explore wellbeing variables in greater depth, and to test this in other populations and to develop the measure. And what I'd love to is hear from you. I'd like to know what it is that came to mind for you when you heard this model about the elements and the golden threads. What surprised you? What do you agree with? What do you think is missing? What do you disagree with? I've created a survey on my website. If you could click the QR, follow this QR link, I would love to hear your feedback. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.